In a quiet village, where everyone knew everyone else's business, Sana's family was both familiar and different. Her father, a hard-working man named Iqbal, had been widowed for years before remarrying to a woman named Salma. Salma had 2 children from her previous marriage, a son named Aftab and a daughter named Mehak. Though Iqbal had hoped his second marriage would bring new happiness and completeness to their small household, it wasn't long before Sana, his daughter from his first marriage, began to feel the weight of the changes. Sana had always been close to her father, their bond unspoken but strong. She had lived with him in their small, modest home, where they shared simple joys, long evening walks by the river, conversations under the stars, and quiet meals around the table. But when Iqbal married Salma, everything changed. The cozy home she had known was now filled with new faces and unfamiliar routines. Her father, caught up in the excitement of his new marriage, seemed to have little time for her anymore. His attention was now divided between Salma, her children, and his once distant work. Salma, a woman with a calm exterior but sharp eyes, treated Sana with an indifferent politeness. She never overtly mistreated her, but there was a coldness to her that made Sana feel like an outsider. Salma's children, Aftab and Mehak, were quick to show their own brand of disinterest. Aftab, already a teenager, was more focused on his friends and schoolwork than on anything to do with his new stepsister. Mehak, only a year older than Sana, however, was the one who made it clear where Sana stood in their new family. Mehak would often make small comments, or in her silence, express her subtle disdain for Sana's presence. The family dynamic, once warm and close-knit, was now filled with awkward silences, looks of disapproval, and a growing sense of isolation for Sana. She was always on the periphery, never quite fitting in. No matter how much she tried to reach out, it felt like she was always on the outside looking in. Her father, perhaps unaware of the growing divide, continued to treat her with the same care as before, but his attention was now split between the new family he was building and the daughter he had known all her life. As time passed, Sana found herself increasingly isolated, her attempts to bond with her stepmother and step-siblings falling flat. Salma's favour leaned heavily towards her own children, who had known each other for years and shared a bond Sana could never break through. Aftab was the typical older brother, dismissing her presence altogether, while Mehak, with her sharp remarks and disapproving glances, made it clear that Sana wasn't welcome in their little circle. Every conversation seemed to exclude her, and every shared moment in the house made her feel even more like an intruder. Sana's place in the family seemed to be one of perpetual second-class status. The house, once hers, now felt more like a place she had to share with strangers. She noticed how often her stepmother's eyes would linger on her step-siblings, making sure they were cared for, praised, and listened to. But when it came to Sana, there was only indifference. No matter how hard she tried to please, whether it was by doing extra chores, studying harder than the others, or simply being polite, it was never enough. She was simply the stepdaughter, the one no one quite knew how to love. It wasn't just the lack of affection that stung, but the constant reminder that she was different. Her stepmother's refusal to truly acknowledge her, and her step-siblings' dismissive attitudes only deepened the feeling of being an outsider. Sana was caught in a limbo, too much a part of the family to be completely dismissed, but never fully embraced either. This sense of being the other in the family soon became her reality. She wasn't allowed the same privileges, the same affection, or the same attention as her step-siblings. While they would sit together in the living room, laughing over stories and inside jokes, Sana would sit silently in the corner, waiting for a moment to belong, to be seen, to matter. But that moment never came. In the eyes of the family, Sana's place was clear. She was the outsider, the stepdaughter who didn't truly belong. And in the village, where reputation and tradition meant everything, it seemed like everyone around her had already decided who she was. They viewed her as quiet, reserved, and distant, not someone to be trusted, nor someone who had much to offer. This perception of her would remain, until the day it was finally shattered and the world would begin to see the person Sana had always been. But for now, she remained on the outside, an invisible presence in the house she had once called home, waiting for the day when her true worth would be recognized, not by anyone else, but by herself first. From the very beginning, it was clear that Sana was underestimated by everyone around her. Whether it was her stepmother, her father, her schoolmates, or even herself, no one truly saw her for who she was. To many, she was just the quiet, awkward stepdaughter, the one who didn't fit in, the one who didn't matter. The weight of this label crushed her silently every day, though she often tried to carry on as though it didn't affect her. But beneath the surface, the feeling of being constantly overlooked and dismissed was slowly breaking her down. Sana's stepmother, Salma, never truly acknowledged her presence. From the moment Sana entered the house, she was treated like an afterthought. When decisions were made about vacations, school events, or even simple household chores, Sana was rarely consulted. If she ever offered an opinion, it was either ignored or quickly shut down with a polite but dismissive, "We'll figure it out." When her stepmother called for the family to gather, it was always Aftab and Mehak who were given the most attention. Sana was often left out of the conversation, either physically or emotionally, and when she did speak up, it was as if no one heard her. Iqbal, her father, though a kind man, was not much better. While he loved Sana, he too was swept up in the dynamics of his new family. He often deferred to Salma when it came to decisions, letting her take the lead. When Sana was left out of family discussions, he rarely intervened. It wasn't that he didn't care, it was just that he didn't see the need to fight for her place. He trusted his wife, and his natural inclination was to avoid conflict. Sana's needs, her desires, and her feelings were often placed on the back burner, and her father's lack of intervention made her feel like her presence wasn't as important as the others. At school, the underestimation was no different. Sana was a quiet student, often keeping to herself, preferring to observe rather than participate in the chaos of school life. Her classmates never saw her as a leader, or even as someone worth noticing. She was the girl who sat in the back of the class, rarely raising her hand, keeping her head down. Teachers assumed she was shy and reserved, never pushing her to excel or take on more responsibilities. When group projects were assigned, she was often left with the least important tasks or ignored altogether. Her teachers saw her potential, but they never bothered to nurture it. They assumed that since she didn't ask for attention, she didn't want it. Even in moments where she succeeded, the credit was rarely given to her. For instance, when Sana won a local writing competition, her stepmother barely acknowledged the achievement, and her father only gave a quick distracted compliment before turning back to his routine. In a family where the success of Aftab or Mehak was always celebrated, Sana's accomplishments were overshadowed and quickly forgotten. Why was Sana so often dismissed? Was it her quiet nature? Her lack of confidence? Or was it simply the fact that she was the stepdaughter, someone who didn't fully belong? The truth was likely a combination of all these factors. Sana's demeanor, soft-spoken, introverted and reserved, made her an easy target for misjudgment. In a world that often equates silence with weakness or incapability, she was automatically labeled as someone who wasn't strong enough to take on challenges. Her introversion was mistaken for lack of ambition or interest, when in reality, it was her way of observing, absorbing, and thinking deeply about the world around her. But her status as a stepdaughter played the most significant role in her underestimation. In a society that placed great value on blood ties and family history, Sana was always seen as an outsider, someone who didn't truly belong. Her biological connection to her father was often overshadowed by her stepmother's presence, and the bond she shared with her father became less important than the one between Salma and her children. In many ways, Sana's position in the family was precarious, and she often felt as if she were walking on eggshells, trying to maintain her place in a family that had never fully accepted her. The expectations placed on Sana were also a contributing factor. In her village, like many others, There were unspoken rules about how a family should behave and who should be given importance. Blood relatives, particularly sons and daughters of the household, were always the first to be prioritized. Sana's existence as the stepdaughter automatically made her the least important, and her presence was never fully acknowledged by either her family or the community. This societal bias not only made it difficult for her to break out of the mold, but it also created a cycle of self-doubt. Her father, though loving, adhered to these expectations, not realizing that his daughter needed more from him than just the bare minimum. In his eyes, the family was now complete, and the undercurrent of this belief was that Sana had to prove herself in ways her step-siblings did not. Her achievements were not celebrated as they were for Aftab or Mehak. They didn't need to fight for love or attention. They already had it. Sana, however, had to earn it again and again. The emotional and psychological toll of being the underestimated one was heavy. It was a constant battle inside her, trying to find the courage to prove herself, to make her presence known, while at the same time feeling like an intruder. Every time her achievements went unnoticed or her opinions ignored, a little more of her self-worth seemed to slip away. Her step-siblings' disregard was the hardest to bear. Mehak's pointed remarks stung, especially when she would mock Sana's quietness or tell her that she was too weak to stand up for herself. It wasn't just the words, though. It was the casual way in which she made Sana feel small and insignificant. Aftab's indifference was no better. He didn't outright dismiss her, but his lack of interest in anything about her life made her feel invisible. The absence of any kind of emotional support from her family, whether it was encouragement or recognition, left her feeling isolated, as if her successes and struggles didn't matter to anyone. There were moments when Sana questioned herself. She wondered if she was truly incapable of being part of the family, if there was something wrong with her that made her unworthy of their attention. These moments of self-doubt, though fleeting, were painful. They made her feel like she was a shadow in her own life, walking through it without ever truly living it. And yet, despite it all, there was a quiet resolve that slowly began to take shape within her. Deep down, she knew she wasn't like the others, and that was okay. She was different. Quiet, yes, but also capable, intelligent, and strong in her own way. The world might not see her yet, but that didn't mean she couldn't change things on her own terms. The underestimated stepdaughter would soon begin to see the value in herself that others had long failed to recognize. The day the storm hit was the day everything changed for Sana. It began as a simple thunderstorm, the kind the village was used to, heavy rain and gusty winds. But as the sky darkened and the wind picked up speed, something shifted. The power went out, and the flooding began. It wasn't long before the small stream that ran near the village overflowed, and the streets quickly began to fill with water. Houses closest to the river were at risk, and Sana's family, though not in immediate danger, needed to prepare. Iqbal, her father, was at work that day, leaving Salma to manage things at home. She was busy trying to contact the neighbours, coordinating with others to ensure that everyone was safe. In the chaos, it became clear that the family's old house, the one closest to the river, would need urgent repairs to prevent the floodwaters from entering. The family had no plan in place. No one knew what to do or where to start, and panic was beginning to set in. Everyone seemed to be running in different directions, trying to take charge but failing to act decisively. It was in this moment of uncertainty, when everyone was too caught up in the noise, that Sana found herself standing at the center of the crisis. Her father hadn't yet arrived home, and Salma was struggling to keep her composure. Her step-siblings were distracted, caught up in their own worries. Despite the feeling of helplessness in the air, Sana quietly took charge. She grabbed the family's emergency kit, checked the supplies, and then calmly instructed Salma to call the local authorities for help. With a clear head and a firm voice, Sana coordinated the efforts of the family, getting Aftab to secure the outdoor equipment and Mehak to gather blankets and supplies for the elderly neighbours. In the midst of the chaos, it became clear to everyone around her. Sana was more than just the quiet, underestimated girl they had always assumed her to be. She was capable, calm under pressure, and more than ready to take charge of the situation. Her intellect, creativity, and practical skills emerged in full force, shocking everyone. While others panicked or bickered over what to do, Sana focused on the practical steps that needed to be taken. She understood how to assess the risks, how to organize people, and how to solve problems in real time. As the rain continued to fall and the water level slowly rose, Sana stayed focused. She rallied the neighbors together, helped organize the evacuation of the most vulnerable families, and even found a way to reroute some of the water using sandbags and makeshift barriers. In the midst of what could have been a disaster, Sana's calm demeanor and problem-solving abilities transformed the situation. She didn't wait for permission from anyone, she simply acted, and her actions saved lives. She was the one who kept everyone together, who saw the bigger picture, and who led the charge when no one else knew how to. That night, as the storm subsided and the village began to breathe a sigh of relief, the impact of Sana's actions began to sink in. Her father, Iqbal, arrived home to find the family safe and the damage to their home under control. Salma, who had been so focused on managing the crisis, looked at her with a newfound respect. Aftab, usually indifferent to his stepsister, caught her eye with a look of admiration. Mehak, who had once made subtle jokes at Sana's expense, no longer saw her as the invisible girl on the outskirts. There was a shift in the way they looked at her, in the way they spoke to her, and in the way they treated her. For Sana, the turning point didn't come immediately. It wasn't as if she suddenly saw herself in a new light. But in that moment of crisis, when the world around her was falling apart, she realized that she had always possessed the strength to handle whatever came her way. It wasn't something anyone else had seen before. She had always been the one left behind, the one no one believed in. But that night, she saw it clearly. She was capable. And that realization wasn't just for others to recognize. It was for her to finally understand. As the days passed and life returned to normal, the shift in the family dynamic was undeniable. Iqbal, who had been so absorbed in his new family, now saw his daughter in a way he never had before. He realized that in his desire to please his new wife and to create a happy home for his children, he had neglected Sana. He had assumed she was fine, that her quietness and independence meant she didn't need as much attention or care. But he was wrong. That night, seeing her step up and take control, he understood how much more he had to give to his daughter, not just as a father, but as a guide and a supporter. Salma too had a change of heart. For the first time, she saw Sana not as the quiet, unimportant stepdaughter, but as an intelligent, capable young woman who could make decisions, lead in moments of crisis, and take care of her family. The respect that had been missing in their relationship began to grow. She apologized for her earlier dismissiveness, acknowledging that Sana had always had the strength she had never bothered to see. Sana's step-siblings, Aftab and Mehak, were also affected by the events of that night. Mehak, who had once teased her for being quiet and distant, began to appreciate her in a way she never had before. Aftab, who had always ignored Sana's existence, now saw her as someone to be respected. Though they were both slow to express their admiration openly, the change was clear. They began to look to her for advice, to include her in their conversations, and to value her opinions. For Sana, the most powerful shift was internal. She had always wondered whether she had a place in the family, whether anyone would ever truly see her for who she was. In the quiet of her room, as the storm clouds cleared and the world outside began to rebuild, she realized that the key to her own success lay in believing in herself. She didn't need anyone else to validate her. She was strong, capable, and worthy of love and respect, whether she was a stepdaughter, a daughter, or anyone else. From that day on, Sana was never underestimated again. The family saw her not just as the outsider, but as the woman who could lead, protect, and inspire. She had proven her worth, not with words, but with actions, and in doing so, she had begun to reshape the way her family viewed her forever. As the days turned into weeks and weeks into months, Sana's transformation became evident not just to her family, but to herself. What had begun as a moment of crisis, where she proved to everyone around her that she was more than just the quiet, invisible stepdaughter, had set in motion a deeper journey of self-discovery. She had tasted the power of taking charge, and it was a taste she couldn't forget. Now, more than ever, she was determined to prove that the person she had always been, quiet, observant, and capable, was enough. Her journey of personal growth began slowly but surely. The first step was gaining confidence in her abilities. In the months following the flood crisis, Sana found herself taking on more responsibilities. Her father, now more attuned to her capabilities, began to trust her with decisions. Whether it was handling family matters or helping with the house, Sana's quiet strength was no longer a source of uncertainty. It was a source of assurance. For the first time, she realized that she didn't have to wait for permission to act. She didn't need anyone else to tell her she was capable. She could tell herself. The support from her family was gradual but significant. Iqbal, her father, became more involved in her life. He started asking her opinions about family matters, and though there were moments when he still defaulted to his wife, he no longer treated her like an afterthought. Salma, her stepmother, had come to respect her, no longer viewing her as the outsider, but as an equal in the family. She would often seek Sana's help when decisions needed to be made, and though their relationship wasn't perfect, it was now grounded in mutual respect. The most profound shift, however, came within Sana herself. She realized that her quiet nature didn't make her weak. It made her observant, thoughtful, and capable of taking calculated steps towards success. Her resilience, the ability to rise again after setbacks, became her greatest strength. She had spent so many years doubting herself, wondering if she would ever find her place in the world. But now she understood that her true strength lay in her persistence. She had never given up, even when the odds were stacked against her, and that perseverance had become her foundation. Sana's transformation wasn't just emotional, it was practical. She began to make decisions for herself in a way she never had before. She enrolled in an advanced computer programming course, something she had always been interested in, but had been too afraid to pursue. She started to spend more time reading, writing, and exploring her creative side. As she grew more confident, she began to speak up in family conversations, no longer shrinking away in silence. Her voice, once hesitant and unsure, now held weight, and people listened. It was a quiet confidence, but it was there, steady and strong. Her relationship with her step-siblings also began to evolve. Aftab, who had once seen her as an afterthought, started to appreciate her in a way he never had. He would occasionally ask her for advice on his school projects, or even seek her opinion on family matters. Mehak, who had been more openly dismissive of her, began to look at her with respect. The teasing stopped, replaced by friendly banter, and while they didn't become best friends, there was a quiet understanding between them, a mutual respect that hadn't been there before. Sana's growth didn't go unnoticed outside the family either. At school, she began to take on more leadership roles. She joined the school's debate team, where her calm, logical reasoning quickly set her apart. Her teachers, who had once assumed she was too quiet to excel, now saw her as a rising star. She became a confident student, someone who not only excelled in her studies, but also inspired others with her quiet determination. One of the most significant milestones in her personal journey came when she won a national award for a software development project she had been working on in her spare time. It was the kind of achievement that most people, even her father, had never imagined she was capable of. When the award was announced, Sana didn't seek praise or attention. But when her father proudly displayed her certificate to the rest of the family, Sana knew that this was more than just a recognition of her work. It was proof that she had broken free from the label of being the underestimated stepdaughter. The label had followed her for so long. It was something she had internalized, carried with her in the quiet corners of her heart. But now, she was actively challenging it. Every new success, every moment of self-empowerment, was an act of defiance against the expectations others had placed on her. She wasn't just proving everyone wrong. She was proving to herself that she was capable, worthy, and deserving of respect. She didn't need to seek validation from her family or anyone else. She knew her worth. One evening, as the family sat together for dinner, a conversation sparked between Iqbal and Salma. It was a simple discussion about the future, about how much their children had grown and where they were headed. As they spoke, Sana realized that her role had shifted. She wasn't just the quiet one anymore. She was part of the conversation, part of the decision-making process. She offered her own thoughts about her future, about what she wanted to pursue, and her family, for the first time, truly listened. Her father looked at her with pride. "You've come a long way, Sana," he said quietly. "I didn't realize how much I had overlooked you. I'm proud of the woman you've become." Salma, who had once been hesitant to acknowledge Sana's potential, now looked at her with a warmth that spoke volumes. "You've shown us all, Sana," she said, her voice softening. "You're not just the stepdaughter. You're family." And that's when it hit her. The label that had once defined her no longer mattered. It wasn't just about proving people wrong. It was about finally realizing her own strength and worth. In that moment, she understood that the only label that ever mattered was the one she gave herself. She was not just the quiet girl in the background, nor was she just the stepdaughter who had been underestimated. She was Sana, a woman with dreams, abilities, and a future of her own making. Breaking free from those old labels wasn't easy, but it was necessary. It wasn't about seeking revenge or validation from those who had underestimated her. It was about living her truth, stepping into her power, and making sure that no one could ever define her again. She had broken free from the chains of others' expectations, and now, the world was hers to conquer. The storm that once seemed to mark the beginning of Sana's transformation had now become a distant memory, a reminder of how far she had come. The family, once so unaware of her potential, had now fully embraced her for the strong, capable young woman she had become. Sana no longer stood on the sidelines, quietly watching life unfold around her. She was now an integral part of the family, not just a stepdaughter, but a respected and valued member of the household. Her father, Iqbal, had undergone a transformation of his own. He no longer viewed Sana through the lens of an outsider, but as a daughter he could rely on. The guilt he once carried for neglecting her was replaced with pride. He often sought her input on matters, trusted her instincts, and valued her opinions in a way he never had before. Their relationship, once distant, was now one of mutual respect and understanding. Salma, her stepmother, had also changed. What once was a relationship marked by tension and a sense of division had blossomed into a friendship of sorts. Salma no longer felt the need to treat Sana as an outsider. Instead, she saw her as the strong, independent young woman she had grown into. She often spoke about Sana with admiration, sharing stories with others about how the girl had stepped up during the crisis, proving her strength and character when it mattered most. There was no longer a divide between them. The line between stepmother and stepdaughter had blurred, leaving behind only family. Aftab and Mehak, once indifferent or even dismissive of her, had also transformed. Their teasing and exclusion had stopped, replaced by a new respect. They no longer saw her as the quiet, invisible girl, but as someone who had earned her place among them. Aftab often asked for her help with his studies, and Mehak looked to her for advice on everything from career choices to personal matters. Sana was no longer the one being overlooked. She was the one others came to for guidance. But the biggest change, the most significant one, was in Sana herself. She no longer sought validation from anyone, not even her father. She had learned to trust herself, to believe in her own strength and capabilities. Her journey was one of self-discovery, and she had emerged not just as the stepdaughter everyone underestimated, but as a confident, powerful young woman who was in control of her own future. Her success wasn't just in the external achievements or the recognition she had earned. It was in the quiet peace she felt within herself. She had stopped measuring her worth by the expectations or judgments of others. Instead, she measured her worth by her own actions, by the love she gave and received, and by the way she now saw herself, not as someone defined by her family circumstances, but as someone defined by her own choices, resilience, and belief in her potential. Reflecting on her journey, Sana could see how far she had come, from the quiet, overlooked stepdaughter to a respected, central figure in her family. But more than that, she realized that her journey held an important lesson for everyone who had ever been underestimated or dismissed based on surface-level assumptions. Throughout her life, people had seen her as the quiet, withdrawn girl who had no place in the family, who wasn't worthy of attention or care. But those judgments were based on incomplete pictures, assumptions that ignored her inner strength, her intelligence, and her potential. In the end, her journey was about proving that it's easy to judge someone based on what you see, but you can never truly know a person's worth until you take the time to look beyond the surface. The truth is, everyone has the potential to surprise you if you give them the opportunity to do so. For the readers, Sana's story serves as a reminder not to fall into the trap of underestimating others. Whether it's a stepchild, a quiet colleague, or anyone who doesn't fit the mold of what society expects, we are all capable of more than what others may see. The journey of the underestimated stepdaughter shows us that greatness doesn't always come in the form we expect. Sometimes it's the quietest voices that carry the most power. Sometimes it's the ones who are overlooked, who have the strength to change everything. And so, as Sana looked at her family, now united in respect and love, she realized that the true victory was not in proving others wrong. It was in proving to herself that she had always been enough. She had learned the most valuable lesson of all. Never underestimate the strength of someone who has learned to stand on their own. As she looked forward to her future, she knew that nothing was beyond her reach, not because she was perfect, but because she had the resilience to face anything that came her way. As she closed her eyes that night, she thought of the words her mother once told her. The greatest power lies in believing in yourself, for when you do, the world begins to see you as you truly are. And Sana knew, without a doubt, that she had finally learned to see herself.